Welcome to Mo Show Live, everybody. Hey, it's Morris Lilienthal. Really excited about today's show because I think the topic that we're going to be discussing and having a good feedback on is something that's important to the average everyday consumer, to people walking around the courthouse square here at my law office, or people in rural country Alabama where I grew up, or in major cities all across the U.S. And, as a trial lawyer, I'm often asked about the civil justice system, asked about the court reform, especially during election times, what that is and why, more should I be involved and concerned about that? And those are the kind of topics that we're going to be talking about today with our guest. And I'm really thankful for our guest today, Tad Thomas, who is a Kentucky trial lawyer and an officer with the American Association for Justice. And AAJ's, and I'm going to ask, Tad, what the mission and what AAJ is, kind of talk about that as an officer with AAJ. But in a nutshell, part of AAJ's mission, folks, is to promote a fair and effective judicial system, to give access to the courtroom to everybody, not just to large corporations, but to the everyday common man and woman. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I'm really excited about talking about this. So without further ado, let me introduce our guest. Again, our guest today is Tad Thomas. Tad is a graduate of Georgetown College in Kentucky. He held a law degree from Northern Kentucky University. And Tad's one of these people that took the bull by the horns right when he graduated from law school. He started in private practice, opened his own firm, hung a shingle out, and was in private practice from about 2000 to 2008, and then had the opportunity to go work with the Kentucky Attorney General's office. And after some time there, was actually promoted to be one of just a couple of assistant attorney generals within the office, and then felt a calling to go back into private practice and did so in 2011, where he opened his current firm, Thomas Law Offices. Tad's firm has 5 attorneys. Their principal office is in Louisville, Kentucky, but I think Tad's proud to announce that he's recently opened in the Cincinnati, Ohio office. And over the course of his law career, Tad has served in various roles with AAJ. He's been in the Board of Governors, Budget Committee, civil and small firm, parliamentarian, and now treasurer. So Tad, thank you for your service to your community. Thank you for what you're doing with AAJ, and thank you for your time today. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Morris. Appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you taking time. I know you've got a busy law practice, open a new law office, and a lot going on with it. I know your time is valuable, so I really appreciate you taking time for our viewers today. Folks, if you're watching today and you've got questions for Tad, you get questions about AAJ, please let us know. I'm going to be watching the live feed over here. I'll try to get your questions so Tad can try to address those, and we can kind of beat that around a little bit. If you're watching the recorded version, you got questions, we'll be monitoring the Facebook feed afterwards, and we'll kind of jump back in and give you some information there that maybe answers some of your questions. And if you're just watching, like my friend Thomas Wallen out on the West Coast, another fellow lawyer, if you're just watching like Tom is, give us a shout out, let us know you're watching, say hello in the comments, and we'll try to give you a shout out there. But what I thought we'd just start is just a real basic question, Tad, and tell the viewers out there what AAJ is, what the American Association for Justice is, and what its role is, and why the average consumer should care about what AAJ is doing.
Thanks, Morris. Well, you hit the nail on the head when you talked about it being a consumer advocacy organization. It started back in the 1940s, actually, when lawyers that represented individuals who were injured at the hands of corporations or employers, places where they worked, they had a compensation system back then. And the attorneys started seeing how big corporations were taking advantage of the system, and employees were not being given, they're being given short shrift, essentially. So they all got together back in the 1940s and met in Oregon and decided we're going to put together an organization to help lawyers help clients. So it started out as a training organization, giving a lot of education, sharing information so that lawyers in California and New York would share information with lawyers in Michigan and Illinois so that everyone would do a better job representing their clients. Over the years, it kind of changed, it transformed, and it grew substantially. We have over 20,000 attorney members now. And it changed names several times along the way. Back in 1977, it became the American Trial Lawyers Association. And then in 2006, we changed the name to the American Association for Justice to kind of talk more about, what we do as opposed to who we are. And even today, why is it important to consumers? It's still a training ground for attorneys on what they need to be doing to do a better job representing their clients. So we do a lot of education, still do a lot of sharing information. Our listservs allow us to share information all across the country in special practice areas. And then now more so than ever before, we do a lot of advocacy in Washington, D.C., both in the House and the Senate, but also in the administrative agencies on behalf of consumers to help protect them from corporations that put profits over people, from administrative agencies that, are out there to protect big business as opposed to consumers and residents of nursing homes and things like that. So we do a lot more advocacy now than we ever did before. But that, in a nutshell, is what we're all about.
Well, that advocacy is so important. And a lot of times we feel like we're fighting, David versus Goliath in a lot of our battles for our clients, and a great group like AAJ that's out there helping us all pull our resources and together to promote the causes and find when we find injustices that are out there, to advocate for our clients and people that are like our clients that may either have had that bad thing befall them or that are prey potential for other future issues that come up. Real quick, I want to say hello to our mutual friend Chris Glover with the Beasley Allen firm. He's watching. I want to say hello to my friend Mike Albee, who's a trial lawyer in Texas. Big Mike, I appreciate you tuning in. But one of the things that that I think that AAJ does along with the consumer advocacy part and angle is that AAJ, and I'm sure you can tell many stories, but about how we work to fight big corporations, to hold them accountable, to make sure that they're not putting profits over safety. And over the course of years, we've heard of many bad examples of where big corporate America, to save 10 cents a vehicle for a little washer or whatever the part may be, that they could make a change, which, to me and you, 5-10 cents a product doesn't seem much. When you multiply that out by millions and millions of products, it turns into big numbers for big corporate America. And those decisions, whether they say, well, we can pay or fight the liability issues or fight the lawsuits, that the numbers turn out that it's easier to pay some claims out than to protect lives, end up costing a lot of people needlessly to be injured, killed. And that's what AAJ is fighting for.
Yes, you're exactly right. And we fight for that, not only in the courtroom, but also in Washington, D.C. So, if we can put together a legal framework with regulations that create safe nursing homes, safe products, safe hospitals, then that gives us a good base to work from. And if that doesn't work, then we use the courthouse, and we go into the courthouse because, like you said, it doesn't matter if you're a Fortune 500 CEO with millions of dollars or if you're homeless, frankly. Everyone has the same rights and should have the same rights when they walk through the door of a courthouse. And so what AAJ tries to do is make sure that the lawyers that represent those individuals and those consumers are empowered with the lessons and the education and the information they need to fight those battles. You mentioned products liability. And our friend Chris Glover just tried a case and did a great job on behalf of his client with a defective vehicle, and was able to go in and hold the manufacturer of that vehicle accountable in the courtroom. And it's thanks to lawyers like Chris and a lot of our friends that are on the watching Facebook right now that are out there fighting to make sure. We do a lot of nursing home litigation, and nursing homes are notorious about funneling all of the profits up to the CEOs and to the shareholders. Meanwhile, the people that actually provide the care, the RNs, the CNAs, and the staff at the nursing home level aren't paid enough, aren't trained well enough, and aren't incentivized enough to give good care. And so we're out there, AAJ, in our nursing home litigation section advocates for nursing home abuse victims as well.
Yeah, and that's one that's near and dear to a lot of our hearts, Tad. But when you have your loved one, and to the point that they need some round the clock care and help, you put them in a place that in folks, if you're having to have somebody that's in that situation, you know these places aren't cheap. They're extraordinarily expensive. And yet you get in there and you find out that the people are overworked, understaffed, and underpaid, and your loved one is not getting the love and care that they deserve from a human to human level, not to mention for what you're paying for. Say hello to our friend Gary Berger watching. Gary, appreciate you watching. When we spoke, kind of getting ready for today's show, you had some really good hot topics that over the last couple of years that AAJ has really been focused on, that I think for our viewers and our audience would be really important to kind of touch on, and why these topics are things that AAJ is lobbying and advocating for in Washington, and some things for consumers to be on the lookout for and be aware of, just so they can be better informed. The first thing that I know has been out there for years, but has really been morphed and changed into new areas of the law, is arbitration, enforced arbitration. Can you kind of tell our audience that maybe that didn't have a legal background what arbitration is, and then what forced arbitration is, and then talk a little bit about how that's really now come into context in employment situations?
Sounds good. Yeah. So that's something that AAJ has worked very hard on the last several years. Arbitration was originally intended to be when you have two businesses that are educated in their contracts and they have lawyers who know what they're entering into, to avoid some of the costs of litigation. And so they go and agree to have a streamlined process in front of an arbitrator who essentially is like a judge, but it's someone that they agree to, and they use a streamlined process. Well, the problem is that big business saw this as a way to get out of their responsibilities to consumers. And so they started putting in what we call forced arbitration clauses, pre-dispute arbitration clauses in all sorts of contexts. So in a nursing home, you have a family who's taking their loved one and putting them in a place they really would rather not take them because they'd much rather have them at home. So they're under the pressure of doing that, and they're signing all these intake documents, and inevitably one of them is an arbitration clause, which says no matter what happens to your loved one, no matter if we drop them and they suffer broken bones, if they get pressure ulcers, if we kill them, that all of those claims go in front of an arbitrator. And instead of it being a fair process, in a lot of these contracts, the arbitrator is selected by whatever the big corporation is. A lot of times the arbitrator is only getting business from those big corporations, so you know how they're going to rule, because that's their lifeblood. It's how they're making their living, and it causes the corporations to be able to avoid responsibility in a courtroom in front of a jury of their peers and in front of people, so that we know what's going on. Arbitration is usually secret. It's confidential. Right. So you don't know when a corporation is doing really bad things, because if it's all in arbitration, then nobody finds out about it. So they don't have any impetus to change their conduct. So you see arbitration clauses in everything: nursing home agreements, consumer agreements, cell phone agreements. So we've been advocating in Washington, D.C. To put limits on it. And, but most people don't know that they're entering into these. One area where we're really advocating is in the employment context. And a lot of people are familiar with Gretchen Carlson, who's become a big advocate for getting rid of arbitration clauses in employment contracts, especially where you have someone like her who's a victim of sexual harassment. In her contract, she was unable to go to a courthouse, but fortunately, because of her stature and her attorneys, they were able to go out there and make it very public what the defendants were doing in that case, and they were able to stop it. But now she's become an advocate for other victims of sexual harassment to ensure that they have the right to go to court for their claims as well.
Yeah, folks, if you're just tuning in, welcome to Motion Live. I'm Morris Lilienthal. We're speaking with our guest today is Kentucky trial lawyer and American Association for Justice Officer Tad Thomas. Tad, real quick, I want to thank Regan Thomas for joining us, Jim Hacking, a lawyer friend of mine in St. Louis. Thank you guys for all joining us. You're so right. Is that when you walk in to buy, here in Alabama, I know you can't go put your loved one in the nursing home without a forced arbitration agreement. You can't walk down to a local car dealership and not buy a car and there's an arbitration agreement, and you're going to be limited there, either limiting the liability. It's kind of like dealing with my 8-year-old Tad when we're playing a game or board game. The rules are going to change in his favor, whatever we're doing, and the rules are changes in their favor. Otherwise, why would they have those agreements, right? It's just that cut and simple, plain and simple. And it's really scary in an employment situation that they're doing that. And when you have something that's really with confidentiality clauses that we're seeing that in a lot of these sexual harassment cases now with a lot of celebrities, is that we find out when it finally all comes out that there have been issues with these people for years and years, but they've had confidentiality clauses that have really kept everything locked up tight. And arbitration can be a means of ways to doing that for corporate America as well.
Yeah, the Remington case is a big example of that. The Remington firearms case where the rifle was going off without the safety would be on. It would go off without someone pulling the trigger, essentially. And they had the problem for years, but because of confidentiality agreements, no one knew about it. And there's some really tragic stories they come out of that, of the children dying, people being prosecuted for murder, even though they were innocent of the charges. And it's interesting because with forced arbitration, one of the things that I always talk about when I go to Washington and talk to congressmen and senators is, you can pass a law that gives any kind of right that you want. But if a corporation can, through an arbitration clause, take that right out of court and put it in the hands of an arbitrator where, as you say, they set the rules, they limit the damages, they pick the arbitrator. If you can't enforce that right in court, there's really no right at all. And I'm hoping that we're starting to educate the legislatures a little bit more about why this is undemocratic and why it's contrary to our Constitution.
Yeah, and folks, if you're watching, regardless of political lines, these are things that affect the everyday consumer, whether we're talking about little bitty items or if you're talking about buying a Mercedes-Benz or a Porsche. These are things that affect whether you're buying, little items. It doesn't matter. It applies across party lines, economic demographics, racial lines, and everything. These are important topics that are important to our families, your families, that can impact you in the blink of an eye, and you don't realize it, and you don't become an advocate or concerned about it until it impacts you. So I think it's one of those things why being an advocate for these issues, and that not only the people that are going through it now, but for people who could be future victims of these issues in the future, that's what's so important about advocating for these things, and to let you, the consumer, know so you can advocate with your representative to let them know, hey, we've got to do something about these issues. Another issue that really intrigued me, that when we spoke yesterday, Tad, that I've known and seen some stuff on some of the listservs and some of the articles that I read, that every day it seems like we're hearing something different about autonomous cars or self-driving cars. And I know that my car now, every time somebody comes up to the side, it blinks and beeps at me. And, if I, don't feel like I'm stopping in time, it's wanting to stop me. Or if I'm backing out, it's stopping me. And a lot of those features are nice and great. But, you were telling me that some of the industries, the Ubers, the Lyfts, the Teslas, now are starting to lobby some of the states for some laws that would really, if there's an accident with a autonomous vehicle, meaning nobody's in the car's driving someone around like it's a Lyft vehicle, that they're wanting to limit the liability or even have immunity from the person who's injured by a driverless car.
That's right. They're going state by state. A lot of people think, well, driverless cars are way out in the future, and we don't have to worry about those right now. But it's actually a battle now that AAJ is waging in state with our state associations, as well as in Washington, D.C. And the idea is that if you have a car that's operating autonomously, if that car runs a stop sign, runs a stoplight, it injures someone, who's responsible for that? And, back in the old days, well, currently, it's the driver is the one that makes that mistake. But if the driver isn't actually driving the car and it's a computer driving the car, then who is responsible when that car, runs in and kills someone? And the bill of goods that the companies have been selling us is driverless cars are going to make us all safer, and it's going to reduce 90% of crashes. And we've already seen that's not true. If you go to YouTube after people get off this Facebook Live, go to YouTube and search autonomous vehicle crashes, and you're going to see people, cars running, red lights that are autonomous. There was a tragedy where a woman was killed, I think it was in Arizona just a couple of months ago, by an autonomous car. The Tesla that was operating on autopilot that ran into the tractor trailer. So who's going to be responsible for these? In the end, you have a victim who's been either killed or catastrophically injured. And so that person has medical bills, lost wages, and things like that. So who's going to be there to take care of them? Is it going to be the taxpayers? Because if nobody's responsible for the crash and nobody's responsible for paying when someone makes a mistake, whether it's in the programming of the car or the operation of the car, it's going to be on the taxpayers. It's going to be on us to take care of those individuals. And we've always felt like, and AAJ has always advocated for, the responsible party ought to be the one to compensate victims and make sure they're taken care of. Well, what the tech companies and the car companies are doing is going state by state and saying, hey, we're implementing all this new technology. We're trying all these new things in the interest of technology in the future. We need to be protected if we make a mistake. And we just don't agree with that position. So we've been fighting over it state by state and in Washington, D.C.
Well, I'm glad, that organizations like AJ are already looking, into the future at these issues, because these companies are trying to get out ahead of this issue that they know could be coming. And, folks, it's no different. I mean, if you're injured in an auto accident today and you have, medical bills, surgeries, things, and you can't work, those things don't change regardless of who or what is driving the car that injured you. And if it wasn't your fault, if you're a pedestrian walking across a crosswalk, or if you're legally, at an intersection going through where you're supposed to be, and this accident happens, and just by happenstance it's a driverless car that hits you, you're no less hurt. And the fact that the car had a malfunction of some type, or there was a defect in the programming or the operation of the program, didn't mean they get away with it. And that's just me. That's just good old common Alabama sense, Tad. And I hope that others out there would agree with me. And I know the victims of any of these actions would agree with me. Let's talk about another topic that I think, in the last 10, 12 years has been in the news a lot. And it's one that ruffles a lot of feathers. I think sometimes is medical malpractice and tort reform with medical malpractice. Can you talk a little bit, maybe give our viewers some statistics about some data about why medical malpractice is a real thing? Now, granted, folks, just like lawyers, we have a few bad apples and lawyers make mistakes. We're not here to say we don't. But in doctors, we have a lot of great doctors for the most part, large, whole. All doctors are out there advocating, do the best they can for their patient under the circumstance. But when they don't, they should be held accountable. But talk to us a little bit about that, Tad, so the consumers out there that are watching can get an idea of the size of the issues out there with medical malpractice each year.
For the longest time, the argument or the story has been, well, there's too many frivolous lawsuits of individuals suing doctors. And if you look at the actual medical studies that are out there, the problem is actually the opposite. And there's one recent study that says that as many as 400,000 people die each year because of a preventable medical mistake, whether it's in a surgery, in a hospital, drugs, the pharmacy screws up, 400,000 a year. So it's over 1,000 people a day. And that puts it, if you put it in with car accidents and cancer and things like that, it would be the third leading cause of death in our country. Yet for years, there's never been an outcry about medical malpractice. It's always been for tort reform. And somehow the idea is that you get better care if people aren't allowed to sue. Well, you hear, for instance, defensive medicine. Doctors are doing too many tests because they're afraid of getting sued. Well, I don't know about you, but if I go in and I've got a problem, and it's cancer or, something major, I want them to do them every test they can. I want them, that's what I expect them to do.
That's right.
So, what they've been trying to do in states around the country and in Washington, D.C., is to, again, limit the access to courts of those of us, common people. And so that if we're injured as the result of a nurse or a doctor, whether it's intentional or just negligent, prevents us from going in to seek compensation. And there's some states where they've been successful. And in those states where they're successful, what happens is if you have someone who is catastrophically injured because of a medical mistake, it ends up being the taxpayers that have to pay for the long-term care for those people. And, if you're a quadriplegic or a paraplegic and you can no longer work, most of those people don't have money for ongoing care. It's going to fall on Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security. So we as a population end up paying for someone else's mistake. And so what AAJ has done for years is advocating to make sure that victims have the right to go to a courthouse and have a jury. It's, not one person's side or the other. Have a jury make a determination as to who is responsible for causing that harm.
Yeah. And real quick, I was going to mention that in the comments, I appreciate Tom Wallen putting a little article in there for us, Tad, to the fatal Arizona crash with Uber. So folks, if you want to learn more about that crash and what's going on, check that link out that Tom posted in it. Thanks, Tom. But, that's so true. And what we see here and what people don't realize, folks, what you don't realize is that a lot of times, as I mentioned before, until it impacts you or your loved one, you may not realize why tort reform is such an important topic to be aware of and know about. But to give you an example, in our state, Tad, now I'm not a med-mal lawyer. I'm one of these that I know just enough to be dangerous about the law here. But we have a total prevention from any discovery on other similar incidents. What that means in plain English, folks, is that in a nursing home case, which is considered a med-mal case here in Alabama, that if your loved one was dropped in a nursing home, CNA, and they didn't follow proper protocol because they didn't have the right number of assistants there to help, or didn't have the bed rails up or something like that, you cannot find out if that CNA or that facility has had other incidents similar to this where it's been a pattern over the last 2 or 3 years where they weren't training or taking proper measures to prevent this from happening from other ones. And then all of a sudden it happened 10 times in the last 2 years. You don't get to learn about it. The jury doesn't get to know about it. And that's huge. I mean, for example, if a truck driver, or somebody, an employee in an average company that's not a medical malpractice lawsuit, generally you would have the ability to learn about if that driver had prior accidents or been arrested for DUI or something like that. That might be available to you for the most part to learn about those things, to present to a jury to examine. Well, was this a good hire? Have they done properly trained and supervised this person? But in a medical malpractice context here in Alabama, you don't get to know about those other similarities. But that's all drives back to what you were talking about with tort reform and, the concerns for doctors to protect doctors and protect hospitals and this kind of thing. So, folks, you hear those myths about tort reform and medical malpractice. And again, we're not here to smudge every doctor that's out there. It's quite the opposite. But that does occur. Those are real things. Pat, I can tell you, and I'm sure you do at your office, I get calls every day about a medical malpractice. Every day.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we got to turn most of those down because, the way that the laws are written in our various states prevents us. We have to tell, these clients that have had something terrible happen to them or their loved one, hey, your legislature has written laws that prevent you from seeking any kind of recovery in this case. And so we have to turn down 9 out of 10 of those cases.
That's so true. No doubt about it. We do as well here in Alabama. Well, I want to be mindful of your time. And what I wanted to a couple of things I want to close on real quick. We've got, as I mentioned here, we've had several lawyers from around the country that have been watching. Talk to us just a minute and speak to the lawyers that are watching about why they would want to get involved with the American Association for Justice and their local trial lawyers, their state trial lawyers organization. Why is that important?
It's extremely important to be a member of both. And I always, when I go around the country and I speak on what AAJ is doing, I talk about it being a 51 front war because we're having to fight in every state and in Washington, D.C. on legislative issues, courtroom issues, and things like that. If you want to get involved in AAJ and you're not a member, you can go to justice.org and it's /join. You can get more information about the organization on the website, and you're welcome to call me, and we can post my email address or whatever up there. And I'm happy to talk to any lawyer who wants to know more about AAJ. But I always recommend that everybody not only should be a member of AAJ, the National Association, but also their State Trial Lawyers Association as well, because they advocate on state issues in their local courthouses and their local capitals as well. So I'm actually a member of 3 different state TLAs because I think it's so important.
Yeah, well, I'm proud to be a member of AAJ and the Alabama Trial Lawyers Association as well, and we have great leadership at both, and really proud to and honored, to be a member of both organizations. Well, folks, if you're watching, I'm going to put a link to AAJ in the comments, and I'm going to put the link to the consumer page so you can kind of learn more about why AAJ is so important to the average consumer, what AAJ is doing and advocating for in Washington, and how the organization is working to keep the courtrooms open and to everybody, not just big corporate America. And I'm going to also tag some social media for AAJ and Facebook and Twitter. Consider following them. A lot of times they will post recalls and important consumer safety information that is really important to know. If there's so many recalls, it's tough to keep up with them, Tad. So the association and the social media folks there do a good job of keeping consumers updated on that. So I'd encourage you guys to hit that like button and follow button so you can keep up with it. Tad, thank you so much for your leadership in the AAJ and for what you're doing in your state. And I really appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me, Morris. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. If you've enjoyed the show, please like and share the show, and you can check out all former Mo shows at my YouTube channel. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.